So it's very wise of me that I asked Dicken to give the final session here on day one. For those of you who have heard Dicken in the past know why, and for those of you who have yet to hear Dicken, well, you're about to find out. So, Dicken, take it away.
Thanks. I feel so tall. Wow. How is everybody doing? Everybody doing okay? End of a long day. Svi says I'm the closer. Right? Close your eyes. Close your eyes. It is very, very good to be back here. I had been coming for a number of years, and then I had some hospital interventions. Oh, she can stay. I had some hospital interventions, was unable to make it last year, so I'm delighted to be here. Really delighted to be here. I want to, before Henry leaves the room, extend my great heartfelt gratitude to my good friend, Rabbi Henry Harris and Svi Werther. I have put on conferences before, and I know what's involved, and it's way more than you can imagine, and there's always last-minute things that come up, and so it's like being able to juggle 10 balls at once. So thank you, heartfelt thank you, both of you. And all the other people, the volunteers here and the other presenters. What I love about this understanding is you get to be a student your whole life rather than a teacher your whole life. You know what that means? There's no end to what can occur to us when we're open to it. I worked with a 92-year-old woman. She said, Dicken, I'm not here for me. It's my husband. Fix him. And then my problems will all be gone. And I said, I'll be glad to talk to your husband if he's interested and willing. But as long as you're here, why don't we have a chat? And she says, oh no, Dicken, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. And I said, really? Do you honestly believe that it's impossible for you at your age, your tender age, it's impossible for you to have a new thought? She said, I suppose I could. And I said, then we can talk. And we had a good talk, and guess who had a new thought? She did. And then by the end of the session, she says, well, maybe if my husband won't come in, I can come back next week. and then as she changed, guess who got interested? Yeah. Wisdom has no age. And we're blessed with an opportunity in this lifetime to be moved and influenced by a wisdom that's far beyond our personal minds and our personal knowing. And I think that's really good news. Okay, this whole notion about thought is way simpler than we make it. That's my topic, Life Simplified. It's way simpler than we make it. Not because of how we talk about it. The presentations have been delightful. I have absolutely loved the presentations. It's the intellect. You start thinking about this, it gets complicated. You start really thinking too hard about it, it can get very complicated. And then you'll feel confused, and then you'll try to think your way out of that confusion. And then you're, like the rest of us, you get into trouble. Because you can't think your way to wisdom. Can't think your way to insight. Right? It's the end of the day. You've heard a lot about this. Listen, we live in a world of thought. That means in every moment we're always thinking. And whatever we think, we're going to feel. It's always been that way. It'll always work that way. It always has worked that way. Okay? I want to tell you a story. Because I think stories have long been held in every tradition. Stories have been held as a way of teaching. So these are teaching stories. I'm going to tell you a story about a teenage boy. But in teaching stories, the person in the story is you and me. It's everybody. Because the parents of this boy, who was in high school, called me up and said, Dicken, our son stays in his room all the time listening to music, and he's very, very unhappy. He's a very smart boy, but he's failing out of school. He doesn't talk to anybody. Would you see him? And he comes into my office, and he's wearing black. And it's not religious black, it's goth black. And he has piercings in his face. And at first it was almost hard for me to look at, because, you know, in his nose and his tongue and in his ears and great big things. I had some thoughts. We've learned that if you want to work with people, you got to get over your thinking about people. So it wasn't long, I just wanted to get some kind of connection with this boy. And I said, what do you like to do? He says, nothing. How do you like school? I hate it. Do you have any teachers you like? No, I hate them all. Do you have any friends? No, they're all jerks in school. What do you do? I go home and go to my room. What do you do in your room? Just hang. What's that like? I don't know. What do you do in your room? I listen to music. What kind of music do you listen to? Heavy metal music. I don't get heavy metal music, or I didn't. Right? I don't get it. It's just like when I listen to it, it sounds like if everybody in here screamed at the top of their lungs. That's what it sounds like to me, right? I like nice, soft music, and he listened to really loud music. You know what I finally realized? Because he came alive when he talked about music. It's the only time he came alive. His eyes sparkled. He got excited about this music, and I'd say, we talked for like half an hour about all the different bands and the music and what he likes about them, because he's coming alive. He's starting to relax, starting to get rapport. It's really hard to talk to somebody about this if you don't have good rapport, if you don't have a good connection. He's coming alive. As he talked about this, all of a sudden I realized the only time this kid feels good in his whole life right now is when he listens to music that's so loud he can't think. You know, like Annika was talking about, she would go into nature, and then her mind would get quiet and she'd feel better. You know, some people have a drink, and their mind clears a little bit and they feel better, right? This guy plays music so loud he can't think, and at some point he starts to feel a little better. He takes his headphones off, he's right back in the same old stinking thinking. That's his thinking. He's just thinking. Hate, hate, hate. Negative, negative, negative. By the end of the session, I really liked this kid. My heart went out to him. He was suffering terribly because he had no clue where his feelings came from. I love Svi's first question. Do you know where your feeling is coming from in truth? He had no clue. What is it like for a human being if they have no clue where their feelings come from? That means every feeling you have feels like it's being done to you by life or by someone else or by something outside of you. It's a terrifying world to live in that world. We all visit. He was spending a lot of time in that world. Everybody made him feel bad. School made him feel bad. You don't just walk up to somebody and say, well, it's all thought. Are we done? You get it? It's just thought, right? Really connect. Really get to know this kid. He wanted to come back for a second session. His parents couldn't believe it. He hated everything, and why would he come back to see this old guy? I wouldn't really call myself goth, you know what I mean? I'm not one of the heavy metal crew. He came back and started sharing with him stories about how I was learning about how this power behind life generates our experience moment to moment. He thought I was pretty crazy. You know, it's a hard pill to swallow at first that people who say stuff to you don't make you feel bad. It's a hard pill to follow that someone doesn't annoy you, right? Or that the traffic isn't really responsible for making you uptight. Or that your test doesn't make you anxious, right? I can remember a friend of mine's daughter coming home and holding up the piece of paper, the test, and said, can you believe I actually thought this paper could make me feel anxious? Why are you anxious? Oh, I got a test. So I start talking to this boy about thought. Here's how it happened. This is how it happens. It sneaks up on you when you're not thinking about it most often. Or it sneaks up on you in a quiet moment. That's when people have insights, new thoughts. Right? They can happen anytime, but that's often when they happen. Here's what he told me happened. He comes into a session, he goes, Dicken, I'm walking to school. I said, why didn't you take the bus? It's a long way from your house to the school. He said, and what, ride with all those brown noses? No way I'm going to ride the school bus. Well, why don't you go with your parents? I don't go anywhere with my parents. I said, okay, so it's a long walk. It's your exercise program. Wonderful. All right? He says, I'm walking to school. And for the first time in my life, I realized as I got closer to school, I felt worse. And I realized I'm thinking, oh no, here I go again. I hate this place. I wish they'd kick me out. If they kicked me out, I wouldn't have to go to this stupid school. I hate everybody. And all of a sudden, for the first time, he saw himself as a thinker. Very first time. He had never considered, as I hadn't, and as many people haven't, I never considered that 100% of our feelings are created by the power of thought. If you don't know that, you keep thinking about stuff for very long periods of time that don't make you feel very good. One time I came up with a metaphor. It's like we're all walking around carrying a bag of hammers. All right? I was really good with the worry hammer. I'd pull it out. The little teeny hammer's got a sharp point. Ow. And someone would say, Dicken, you look worried. And I say, I'm not worried. He said, yeah, you look worried. No, I'm not worried. Well, you look worried. No, I'm just thinking about important things. Right? Sid Banks said to me, Dicken, what about the hammer? I said, what hammer? Because we don't see thought, it's invisible until you see it. And I tell you, when you see it, and you see the connection between I'm thinking this thought and I'm feeling this feeling, when you see that connection, it's like realizing my headache is being created by this. And then you don't ask for a technique to put the hammer down, because there is no technique. There's nothing you have to do. It's not like, oh, I have to stop thinking. As soon as you realize, I'm thinking up worry. It's what Sid Banks would call, you recognize the very fact of thought, the very fact that you're a thinker and creating with your thinking this feeling. He saw himself, and he put the hammer down. You know what Keith Blevins said? I love this. He said, when you start putting hammers down, you have less thinking on your mind. You have less. You can see people walking around. Once you start seeing people as thinkers, you'll see people thinking. And it's a whole bag of hammers. Have you ever seen the anger hammer? Thor would have trouble with this one. You got to use both hands. It's big, it's heavy. You ever seen those cartoons? When I was a little kid, I would watch cartoons, and there would be somebody get bonked on the head with a big cartoon hammer. They'd see stars, and the birds would tweet. Anger hammer. So angry. I've asked people all over the world, what are you feeling? No right or wrong answer on this, because we're always feeling something. What are you feeling? And where do you think that feeling comes from? That's why I loved your question, Svi. I have never had anybody say, that's obvious, it's just my own thinking. I'm feeling happy. Why are you happy? Well, that sun came out. Well, the sun came out yesterday, you weren't very happy. Why are you feeling sad? Oh, this thing happened. Well, I saw you laughing the other day. Right? Why are you anxious? Oh, I've got all this work to do. Well, you had the same amount of work to do at lunch, and you weren't particularly anxious at lunch. I don't know why people put their thought hammers down at lunch. Not everybody, but a lot of people, they put their thought hammers down. Back to the boy. All in black, piercings, hating the world, marching towards school, and he saw a thought hammer, which just means he had less thinking on his mind when he went to his first period class. I remember what class it was. It was an English class, because I started my career as a high school English teacher. And I worked with these kids, and I fell in love with these kids. And I never saw a mental illness. I just saw kids who didn't know how things worked. Kids who would get caught up in their thinking and not know it. Kids who didn't know about divine wisdom. Right? Not their fault, they just hadn't learned or been taught about this. Now we have people all over the country, all over the world, teaching kids this. So he saw the thought hammer, puts it down, goes into English class. They're talking about a book that he hadn't read. But when our minds are clear, a lot of things start happening differently. You're more present, you're more curious, you're more open. An open mind is receptive to new thinking. So halfway through the class, they're talking, he raises his hand. First time ever in this class. As a matter of fact, I found out later, he didn't even talk in school. Ever. Why would you talk if you hate everybody? He raised his hand. The teacher, bless her heart, couldn't remember his name, but said, you. And he had some kind of answer. And then a few more times during the class, he would say some things. He actually was an extremely smart kid. So when he talked, he had some things to say. After class, a kid comes up to him and he says, why don't you come sit with us at lunch? Do you know he was the kid in school who sat at the table by himself every day and no one would sit with him because he was the weirdo? And he was the one that everybody teased. Right? He's the one who felt completely alone and isolated. He was the one who felt unloved. And now this kid is saying, why don't you have lunch with us? And his mind was clear enough at that point that he goes, yeah, why not? He says, you're very interesting, he says to his friend. He says, what do you mean? I don't know, the way you talk is different. You're just interesting. He said, and besides, I have to tell you, you lost me a lot of money. I said, what do you mean? Well, we took bets. We didn't think you could talk. We thought you were mute. You blew it, buddy. You cost me a lot of money. I lost the bet. So he goes and this is the first time in a long time his head was clear enough that he could connect with people. And he started making friends. I'll never forget the day when he came to see me and he says, you know, a lot of these kids aren't that bad. I mean, once you get to know them, they're not that bad. Right? And then I'll never forget the day when he comes in and he says, you know, teachers are just like anybody. They're thinkers too. If you go halfway, most of them will come halfway and meet you. Guess who at some point, as he continued to learn this, and he had less and less thinking on his mind, he kept catching thought hammers and going, well, I could, but why? Who suffers? Not the other people. If somebody came up and hit you with a baseball bat, it's a horrible thing. If you picked up the bat and walked away and kept hitting yourself, who suffers? Forgiveness just means you're willing to set down judgmental thoughts, because when you hold on to those thoughts, it creates painful feelings and you suffer them, right? So you started forgiving life and parents. His parents called me up and said, what are you doing to this kid? I always get that call from parents. What are you doing to my kid? Nothing. He's waking up to how life works. His innate health is coming out. The parent said, he's talking to us. I said, yeah, that's what you do when you're not caught up in a lot of painful thinking. You start to feel more connected to life. One day, he comes into my office and he's wearing something other than black. And for him, this was like major transformation. And we had such a good relationship then. I could tease him mercilessly. So I go, hey, Rainbow Man, how you doing? He was seeing color in life again. I've worked with depressed people who, when they begin to get out from underneath the burden of their own thinking, the unnecessary thinking Dr. Blevins was talking about, the thinking we do all day long without realizing it, so we get burdened and then we attribute it to something else. That one woman I worked with said, we were in Vermont and they have beautiful colors on the trees. And she said, Dicken, this is the first fall that I've seen the colors. You know the saying, come to your senses? It's a beautiful thing. You wake up to thought, you come to your senses. You become more awake, more aware, more attuned. Annika, that was beautiful. We become in tuned with nature. with life, with the way life actually works. As we have less thinking on our minds are open and receptive. And I can tell you, as a fact, that wisdom, this intelligence that's built into life, that knows how to create universes and operate them, that have created this beautiful human system, this intelligence is waiting to break through into human consciousness when our minds are open and receptive. When our minds are, some would say, prayerful. When you're open and receptive to something greater, something beyond us, something bigger, wiser. I'm going to put somebody on the spot. Somebody did a little promo for this concert. Zipporah Harris. She said, I wrote down what she said. I got so affected. It was so beautiful. It was so simple. It was so true. I've learned to get quiet. I've learned to get quiet and to attune my inner wisdom and just notice where God is leading me. At many points in my day, I would try to listen deeply and recognize it, to hear it. The way I like to say it is, when your mind is quiet and your heart is calm, you know who you are and you know what to do. Now let me read the same thing said a little more in a little more complicated fashion by my dear friend Sydney Banks. That as you begin to understand the nature of thought, without even trying, like if you touch a hot stove, the wisdom behind life knows touching, pain, not a good idea, and you take your hand off. You do not have to take a single course on taking your hand off hot stoves. Right? I watched my little grandson running around, falling against the fireplace. Blisters. One time learning. One time learning. Sid Banks says if you really see the nature of thought, you take your hand off your thinking. Not some of it. Like, you know what I used to do? I used to cheat. I'd go, ow, 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 oh, I know it's thought. And I'd take away all my fingers but two, which meant I kept thinking. Like, oh, I know it's thought. It's just thought. I should let go of it now. Why is it still here? It shouldn't still be here. You see, I hadn't taken my hand off. When you take your hand off, you disengage from your intellect, you fall out of your thinking, you fall wide open, and that's where the magic happens. So here's another way of saying that when I read this, I had a massive insight. I love that after 40 years, I can still have big insights about the principles, because there's no end to the revelation of God's wisdom through us. The waiting to break through evolutionary impulse that's built into the very fabric of life. It's not personal. It's not human. It comes from beyond what we can conceive. So you have to, here's Sid's quote. You have to go beyond all concepts. And you will find it in the stillness of your mind, in the quiet chambers of your mind, when you go from the known to the unknown, from the physical to the spiritual. When you hear beyond the word, beyond my words, don't listen to my words. When your mind gets quiet, you're not listening to my words or your words, all the chatter. When you go beyond all the words, that's our natural state. When you hear beyond all the word, an inner light goes on. Light has been used as a metaphor for wisdom or divine consciousness forever. We're caught up in our personal thinking, it gets very dark. We open the door to something greater, beyond. This inner light comes in. That's why they talk about when you die, go to the light. Spiritual teachers say, don't wait until you die. Die to your personal thinking and go to the light. Or, in common parlance, would you lighten up? Because when we get caught in our personal thinking, it creates a heaviness. And if you realize that's thought, it creates a lightness, and you lighten up. You can literally see people walking around burdened by their thinking. Our postures change, our voice changes. An inner light goes on and it brings out inner knowledge and wisdom, spiritual intelligence before the contamination of human thought. Be grateful for the spiritual wisdom you have found that has changed your life. Tell a personal story, if I might. I worked for years with refugees. I saw the fear and terror that a lot of refugees live in. So over the years, I volunteered to work with different groups of refugees. And I got to know one family that the man was a teacher, his wife was a weaver. They had escaped persecution. He literally went out the back of his school window and ran into the cornfield and hid, and then worked his way through and eventually got to the United States. And I got to know them. I spent about a year and a half being with this family almost every day. And they didn't speak English. I speak a little Spanish. Hola, ¿cómo estás? Vamos en el coche. I don't know a lot, but I knew enough that I could talk to them and communicate with them. I got to know them. They have 3 young kids. I became like the uncle of the kids. Spent a lot of time with them, loved the kids to pieces, right? And then they move away, right? They moved to another state. And I hadn't heard from them in a while, and I got a phone call just about dinner time. And I answer the phone, and it's Maria, the mother, the wife. And she says, Dicken, I was working in a grocery store. I lost my job. I think it might have something to do with my green card. I couldn't understand. My papers are all in order. I don't know why. I couldn't understand. And my husband and I made minimum wage. Now we don't have enough money to pay our rent. And it's been 3 weeks, and we've run out of food, and my kids have gone 2 days now with no food. And I'm afraid my husband's going to lose his job. So we've decided we're going to pack up all of our stuff, and we've decided we're going to drive back to you and live with you and your wife and kids and dog and 2 cats. I wasn't opposed to doing that, but I didn't know if that's what would make most sense. So I said, Maria, I am so sorry. Listen, I didn't say it's just thought, get over it, by the way. I said, listen, let me think about this, and I'll call you back. I'll get back to you. I'll see what would make most sense to do. Now, in my past, my favorite hammer, I told you, was the worry hammer. And in the past, I spent an enormous amount of time thinking about my life in ways that made me anxious. And I thought life made me feel that way. I didn't know. I didn't know until I learned this. So by habit, it was so tempting. Oh my God, what's going to happen? I can't believe, oh my God, these kids are starving. Oh, Jesus. And I'm getting so anxious, I can't think. And then I go, oh, I know I don't do my best thinking while I'm doing this. And I said, I'm not going to keep thinking about that. And then I got a little nervous. If I'm not thinking about it, nothing will happen. Well, this is where you begin to have faith that when your head clears, wisdom brings you the thinking and feelings that you need to deal with whatever is going on. That's what I found. That's what I see happening for my clients. So, I go play a game with my kids. Do you know how I would have felt about that in the past? How can I play a game with my kids if these other kids who are also my kids are starving? How irresponsible. You know what I'm doing? I'm running full speed toward an open, receptive state where I can in tune best. In tune best. Hear what makes sense. Bedtime came. I really started to worry. Oh my God, I've been waiting for an answer, nothing's coming, I don't know what to do. Bedtime came, I started to worry. I saw the hammer again, I eventually fell asleep. I woke up in the middle of the night sweating and worrying because you keep thinking at night. And then I saw the hammer and I got up really early, as my wife and I would do before our kids were up. And we'd like to go for early morning walks together. Right? And so I'm walking along and we're halfway through our walk. And my wife says to me, Dicken, what are we going to do about Maria and Arturo? And spontaneously, 3 names popped into my mind. This is how wisdom works. 3 names popped into my mind. The name of a lawyer who turns out to be the guy who made friends with this family and did free legal work for them. The name of a nurse, Janet, and the name of a friend of mine, Frank. I go, why did those names pop into my mind? I go, oh! The lawyer will be able to follow up on why she lost her job if it had something to do with her papers. He knows all about that. She has legal papers. He'll call her up, find out, and then talk to the grocery store and find out what happened. Perfect. And then I go, Frank, why did I think of Frank? Oh, he's the head of refugee services, and he knows about services that provide food for families in need. Why didn't I think of that? Perfect. Janet, why did I think of Janet? Janet mentioned to me a year and a half earlier in a conversation, Dick and I have a sister who lives in Maine who developed a business for women so they can stay at home and work. And it's a weaving machine, and they weave hats and scarves and mittens for all the ski places in the Northeast in Vermont. And they make it better than minimum wage income. Get this, Maria, my friend from Guatemala, had been a weaver, And she had said to me, Dicken, I think I have to go back to work if I stay here. But when I go back to work and my husband's working, that means our 3 kids are home alone from after school until we get homes. So for hours, a 10-year-old is responsible for the 2 younger kids, a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old. It's really hard for them. She said, but I'd love to stay home, but I know I'll never be able to do that. So I called up Maria. It's 7 o'clock in the morning. No, actually, first I called the lawyer, and I knew he'd be up, and he answered the phone. He said, I'll call her later today. I called up Peter, or Frank, and Frank said, oh, I can figure that out. I'll find out how they can get food and hook them up with the right resources. And then Janet, I called Janet, and she goes, oh, I love this family. I'll do anything for them, right? So she said, I'll talk to my sister and hook her up with this woman. I called my friend Maria back, and I said, Maria, I've been thinking. I didn't say doing a lot of non-thinking. I've been thinking about what you said. And here's what occurred to me. Here's what made sense. Here's what made sense. And I shared it with her, calmed her right down. She got support and help and resources, and they ended up being able to stay in this community with their friends there. See, that's within everybody. I've seen no exceptions. You know what Sid Banks used? When he said this, it hit me like a ton of bricks. He said, there's not a single person in the world wiser than you. You just don't know it. Or you get so caught up in your thinking, you don't live it. You don't experience it. If your head clears, you have all the common sense you need. You have all that you'll know to be able to navigate your life. It doesn't mean the next minute you can't pick up a little hammer and start going, right? But then you see, oh, that's thought too. Hands off the stove. Is this making sense, people? Is this making sense that we're always thinking? When we don't know it, we do a lot of thinking that's not helpful and unnecessary. When I started learning this, I'd catch myself worrying, and I'd worry for 10 minutes instead of an hour. Do you know the difference? Do you know what that started to do for me? So I love metaphors because that's how I learn. Say we had a mountain to climb. Life has challenges, so I'm using a mountain. We have to climb the mountain, and we all have to do it. Let's say we have 100-pound packs on our back filled with rocks. It'd be really hard going through life. It wouldn't feel like it's a very easy task to go through life. And then you put down a whole pile of thinking because you see it as thought. You're now 10 pounds lighter. That's what insight can do, is start to lighten our load. Some people go 10 pounds, well, I wanted the whole thing. And we get greedy, and we pick up the greed hammer. Right? Sid used to say, don't ever want to get more. Be grateful for what little you have, and that'll grow. That'll get bigger. So if you go 10 pounds, oh, thank God. Whew, that's better. That is better. Thank you. Another 10. One time I heard Keith say, learning the principles is like going on a thought diet. Less is more. Let me read to you. You can find truth in a lot of places. Sid used to say you can hear it spoken in the grocery store. People may not know it, but they'll say incredible things pointing toward truth. I pulled out one of my favorite books before coming here. It's called I Asked for Wonder, and it's the spiritual anthology of Abraham Joshua Heschel, one of the foremost rabbis in the United States. He was born in Poland. He got his doctorate in Jewish studies in all places of Germany. The war broke out. He lost everybody in his family, were killed by the Nazis or in concentration camps. He came to the United States. He was a professor at the Jewish Theological Seminary of America and the Hebrew Union College. And I love this book. Love the what gives rise to faith is not a sentiment. That's a feeling. It's not a feeling. It's not like you can only discover truth if you have this wonderful feeling. You can realize truth anytime, anywhere. Being in a really low state, seeing the truth, the fact of thought, can set you free even when you feel miserable. Right? What gives rise to faith is not a sentiment, a state of mind, an aspiration, but an everlasting fact in the universe. Something which is prior to and independent of human knowledge and experience, the holy dimension of all existence. All experience stands in the dimension of the holy, and nothing can be conceived of as living outside of it. All existence stands before God, here, everywhere, now, and at all times. You're looking for a fact. You're looking for something. A fact is different than an idea or a belief. Every human being thinks. That's a fact. I can go anywhere in the world and say human beings think, and I've never once had people argue with me because it's not a belief. It would be like if I said you breathe. This is like people go, I don't. You think. You experience life. You're aware of life. I can go anywhere in the world and say human beings are aware of life, which is a divine gift, which allows us to be aware of the fact of thought. Right? And all human beings have a mind. And all I can say is it's a far wiser, more knowing mind than you can imagine. When I teach in companies, I've taught in companies all over the United States. When I teach in companies, all the engineers that I've worked with understand the notion that the mind is capable of far greater things than anything we can imagine. Right? That there's more than meets the eye. And when I've seen the more than meets the eye and gotten a little glimpse of that, and when clients I work with get a little glimpse that we're connected to this divine power, it does something for people to realize they're connected to something greater. Intimately, always, already, in truth. Well, you can think about this or not. If you think about it, it can be helpful and uplifting, or it can weigh on you. If it weighs on you, may you recognize the hammer. If you get too seriously, if you're too serious about learning this stuff or too serious about life, seriousness is just a feeling created from thought. If you see that thought hammer, you will begin to lighten up. Right? You'll lighten up. And your spouses will notice it. And your kids will notice it. And we're attracted like moths to flame, to that light, the spark within. Right? Some people say the purpose of life is to fan that spark until we burst into flame. It's been one of my favorite images. May you all burst into the flame of inner light and enjoy your life. Thank you.